Hello everybody and welcome back to Spacedock. I'm Joanna and today we're looking at one of my favourite design styles for fictional vehicles, messiness. Let's take a look at some examples of what I mean, starting with the designs in the real world in the Matrix. The way the machine designs do this is by taking cues from nature, with their larger machines having lots of knurls and spines in their surfaces, just like crustaceans. The huge defensive armada near the end of Revolutions go really hard on it, and due to their size, the smallest details just merge together into an overall texture. It's like how white noise just turns grey at a distance, leaving the bigger shapes to define what's going on. The Machine City is also like this, being very much like a coral reef and full of the haphazard details of such places, but there's still larger forms. It's like semi-organised chaos. The human designs have their own mess to them that I just love. The hovercraft are covered in antennas and turrets and the zappy lightning hoverpads, making them sit right on that border between something neat and ordered and something maybe improvised, which totally fits in with what they're meant to be. That actually reminds me a lot of how tanks can end up looking, especially those that have undergone upgrades and additions over time. Tanks already end up carrying lots of bits on the outside like spares, tools, stowage, and the occasional log. Piling additional systems like sensors, active defense, and remote weapon stations on top of all this just adds to that mess. Since these extra things seem like they're just put where they fit, the vehicle ends up looking halfway between the order of the original vehicle and the chaos of the upgrades. Back to the Matrix, and there's also the design of the real world itself. The biggest element we see is the incredibly industrial underground areas, with pipes and tubes and all sorts covering pretty much every surface. The Akira inspiration is obvious here. Humans scrounging out an existence amidst the decaying industrial ruins of the past is just such a vibe. There's a lot of crossover in all these designs with some things from Blade Runner. There's the big refinery that surrounds the Tyrrell building and the semi-chaos of the street level, but I specifically mean the blimp. It's barely seen in the movie, but it certainly leaves an impression with its lit-up antennas and billboard. Another similar organic-inspired set of designs are the ugly, blobby Harkonnen vehicles. Their rough surfaces don't go fully into what I mean with the messy style, outside of maybe the big flat gunship we see very briefly, which takes inspiration from diseased, tumorous flesh, an external representation of how vile the Harkonnen are. To some extent, the spam of weapons over the front of the big bloated fly that is the special Harkonnen ornithopter hit the right vibe of messy. This is notable because there's another real-world analogue here for busy designs in military helicopters. Attack helicopters are the obvious thing here with all the outboard weapons they carry, both mounted to pylons on the sides, with the typical nose-mounted optics and cannon. With the intakes and exhaust for the engines and various other details, attack choppers end up being endearingly ugly. Transport helis can go this way too, like the NH-90, which is one of my favourite looking helicopters precisely because of all the flight sensors and bulges and shapes it's covered in. Naturally, a lot of this busy styling gets transferred over when emulating military helos, like with BSG's Assault Raptors with its many extra weapons, and of course the various RDA rotorcraft used in the Avatar movies. Let's get back to other busy fictional designs though, with a look at the more industrial side of things with Factorio's new space platforms. Now yes, these are player created and can end up being whatever shape the player wants, but the mechanics of the platforms are intended to encourage players to make them as compact as possible, hopefully leading to smushed, organic sort of shapes. Like Dosh Doshington's platform designs in his big Space Age playthrough, whose silhouette reminds me a lot of some Star Sector ships, particularly the Enforcer, Gemini, and Retribution. In fact, there's a lot of this messy ship styling across Star Sector's vessels with the game's exposed engine workings, detailed weapon mounts, and occasional bit of truss work and piping. The specific details vary based on a number of factors, including the ship's tech level, role, and even who is fielding it, so you can suss out a lot about a ship just from looking at it. This same concept is used to great effect in The Expanse, where the professional navies of Earth and Mars have somewhat clean-looking vessels, but the Belters travel around in ramshackle industrial messes. They often have an improvised, built-out look to them with extra armor and weapons and other features added on, giving each ship a great deal of history and character. Belter ships feeling like flying construction sites or refineries strapped to rocket engines makes them ugly, utilitarian, and very cool. It also makes them feel like underdogs when compared to the warships of the inner planets. And now it's the turn of ships to be used as the real-world example of messiness, since they are generally festooned with all sorts of equipment. There's masts with antennas and radars for all sorts of roles, and in some ways these masts remind me of the rigging on the masts of old sailing ships. But there's also stuff like lifeboats, anchors, railings, funnels, and additional weapons, though this last one is much less noticeable these days with the advent of precision-guided weapons like missiles. Carriers in particular have a lot of the crazy mess that I love so much, especially around the sides of the flight deck. There's access stairways and safety nets and all sorts in these places, and older ones included a lot of defensive weapons here too. And these are one of the few modern vessels with this busy look, since there's a general trend toward optimizing for low observability, or stealth. Which is a shame, because the busy sections of real ships help to instill a sense of scale in them, something which is extremely important in spacecraft art. Take the mothership from the end of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which is covered in all sorts of details and lights and antennas that make it feel like a whole city in the sky. This use of busy detailing for scale goes double for the really mega huge things we see so often in sci-fi, because at that size, spacecraft lack context cues that would normally help us see something as large, particularly atmospheric haze. This is also why big mountains on the moon just look like little mounds. We can't tell how far away they are. But sometimes using busy detailing like this can work the opposite way, like with the Borg cube's early appearances. I think it's one of the rare times that one of TNG's miniatures actually feels like a miniature, because the scale of its messy greeblies is off. Don't get me wrong, it's still an incredible piece of work, but the one made for First Contact with the photo-etched brass just feels so much bigger because the detail is smaller. As great as the Borg ships look, not everything ends up looking good when they're that messy. In fact, it's very easy to go too far and over-greeble every single surface, or add too many bits and bobs sticking out of it. Star Trek 2009's Narada almost does this, but really I only give it a pass because it resembles the gorgeous Haworthiopsis attenuata on my windowsill. Another potential problem is not hitting the balance between detailed parts and smoother sections, at least on ships that try to do that. Star Wars does a really brilliant job of nailing this balance with its detailed trenches on standard vessels, and cityscapes on the biggest superships. There's also plenty of times where having a messy, detailed surface with lots of bits sticking out is just not at all appropriate for the role the vehicle is in. This is generally going to be things meant to move smoothly and efficiently through fluids, since the bits sticking out add drag. The exception to this does seem to be military helicopters, but for those it's a trade-off. Civilian choppers are much cleaner for efficiency purposes, but there was also the Comanche many years ago, though that thing was meant to be stealthy, which is of course the other big real-world reason you'd have a smooth design, as I mentioned in the ship section earlier. Maybe you don't want something smooth though, for whatever reason. It can be a difficult thing to get looking right, to hit that balance where messy chaos actually looks appealing rather than just be, well, messy chaos. But when done right, it can make some of the most interesting and evocative images in sci-fi, at least in my opinion.
In your opinion?
Yes, in my opinion.
You can support Spacedock by joining our Patreon, where you can get our frigate and space fighter design reference books. Alternatively, you can support us directly through YouTube by becoming a channel member. Thanks to our supporters, and thank you for watching.